I like all kinds of architecture, so how could I possibly pick a favorite building? Coming up on Architecture Codex.
Architecture Codex. If you want to see more, like, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe.
Sometime in high school, I decided that I did not need to pick favorites. There were too many good things to pick a favorite color, or a favorite cake, or a favorite song, or a favorite band, or a favorite TV show. Well, okay, Star Trek, but that was after Batman. Or a favorite food, or a favorite car, or a favorite movie, or a favorite book. And certainly, as a person studying architecture, there was no way I would be able to pick a favorite building. Okay, actually, the Pantheon. The Pantheon is a Roman temple in the city of Rome dedicated to many gods, which is how it got its name, Pantheon. Pan is Greek for all, and theos is Greek for gods. All the gods. Pantheon. This is a different building from the Parthenon at the Greek Acropolis in Athens. Parthenos is Greek for an unmarried woman, a maiden, a virgin. The Parthenon is a temple dedicated to the virgin goddess Athena. The Parthenon is in Athens. The Pantheon is in Rome. I tell my young architecture students, if you learn nothing else about architecture, learn that. Picking a favorite building, then, is a combination of rational thought and emotion. And for me, the Pantheon represents both. Rationally, the building is a standout Roman temple that was adopted by the Christians in 609 AD and renamed St. Mary and the Martyrs. Consequently, there has been an effort to preserve the building, protecting it from the ravages of time and mankind, so that what we see today is almost unchanged from its antiquity. Part of the appeal, then, is the almost 2,000-year history we see as vibrant as when it was built. There were previous temples on the site, and there are a lot of unanswered questions. Consul Marcus Agrippa built a temple at the site around 31 BC, along with baths and a basilica, which was a Roman office building, not a church. Some say the original temple faced south instead of north, as the current one does. Some say it had a round footprint. Part of the confusion was that the temple was reportedly rebuilt after a fire in 80 AD by Emperor Trajan's favorite architect, Apollodorus of Damascus. This seems to have been an almost complete rebuild, and whatever temple there was before, north or south facing, was likely demolished. There was another fire in 110 AD. Restoration of that temple began immediately under Trajan, but when he died in 117 AD, the construction was completed in 126 AD by Emperor Hadrian, who is believed to have put the inscription, which is shorthand for Marcus Agrippa, Lucius Filius, Consul Tertium Fequit, meaning Marcus Agrippa, son of Lucius, made this building when consul for the third time. The inscription refers to the original temple, but on the third iteration of that temple, confusing architectural historians for many centuries. I might infer that the site, having suffered from two fires in a very short time, that the concrete dome of the Pantheon was built then by Hadrian, an avid architect himself, as a solution to a very old problem, which is the roofs of temples burning. Indeed, even the medieval stone vaults were designed to reduce the damage done by fire to those Gothic churches, although we saw that there was still a wood construct above, and those fires can still occur and do damage. But I cannot find a clear answer as to when the round floor plan of the Pantheon appeared, or when the concrete dome was conceived. Regardless, it is still there for us to admire. And yes, I did say the dome was concrete. Briefly, concrete is a chemical bonding of compounds, notably what we call Portland cement, water, and aggregate, generally sand, pebbles, and gravel. Concrete does not dry, it sets. It is a chemical and exothermic reaction, meaning that it gives off heat. It is different from cement mortar, which is used to bond bricks or stones stacked as masonry. The Romans probably developed concrete about 200 years BC, with a recipe, according to Vitruvius, writing in 25 BC, that contained 2 parts pozzolanic volcanic ash and 1 part lime for both underwater and structural use, plus, of course, the water and the aggregate. The aggregates the Romans used contained small rocks, old tiles, broken bricks, and occasionally pieces of tufa, but it also contained stratlingite crystals, which appear to increase the tensile strength of the concrete. And some earlier concrete domes survive, such as the frigidarium of the bathhouse in Baiae near Naples, which some erroneously call the Temple of Mercury. It has a smooth interior, but featured the central open oculus. The structural visceral power of poured concrete that the Romans discovered is what intrigued many of the 20th century brutalist architects. The dome at the Pantheon was and is the biggest poured concrete dome without steel reinforcing. It is 142 feet in diameter and sits on a brick drum such that a billiard ball, 142 feet tall, could fit snugly inside of it. The coffers, 5 rows of 28, do more than give the space greater depth and texture. They were an intuitive way to reduce the weight of the dome, allowing the concrete ribs in both directions to bear the load. It was formed by building the entire dome in negative with wood, the concrete poured, and the wood scaffolding removed. Concrete does have a pargine plaster layer applied after the pour to even out any irregularities. Domes were basically understood to be arches projected in 360 degrees, and the most important part of the arch is the keystone at the top, which keeps all the other stones in place. So how is it that the Pantheon dome, which is a series of projected arches, is missing all those keystones in the middle? I mean, there's a 19-foot diameter hole right at the top of the dome. The structural theory is that the ring that encircles the opening is acting in compression. Instead of pressing the load into the center of the dome, the compression ring directs the loads to the side around the center. Since it is a dome, the forces remain in balance, so the opening is stable. The dome at its base, where the arches might thrust outward, is buttressed by the massive brick walls that support it, at times 25 feet thick. It is the interplay of light through the oculus across the deep concrete coffers that gives the building a kinetic, dynamic, light in motion interplay of sky and earth that makes the space transcendent. This celestial interplay occurs above the niches encircling the space where the gods and now Christian tombs and chapels are nested. Light, loft, and craft. The building is designed to evoke transcendence, that you are in some place different where you can encounter God. So that adds to its appeal to me. After seeing the oculus, that's when most people ask, what happens at the Pantheon when it rains? We, as second-year students taking architecture history, asked that of our professor, Kenneth Featherstone, who gave an explanation that his architecture professor gave him when he was a student. So this explanation goes back at least till the 1940s. When it rains, you have a high-pressure system that meets a low-pressure system. And so at the Pantheon, when the low pressure outside of the dome starts to rain, the high pressure inside of the dome creates an updraft, which pushes the water out, and so that the rain never gets to the bottom of the Pantheon and the floor stays dry. Well, that's a great explanation, except it's not true. What happens at the Pantheon when it rains? The floor gets wet. But Romans being Romans, they had designed it so there are drains right at the center so that the water can flow away. To the dome and the drum is attached a traditional Greek pediment front. There are 16 40-foot tall monolithic columns with Egyptian granite shafts and white marble capitals and bases. The 3 columns along the left of the facade were replacements made in the 17th century, reportedly to fix the error of those columns being too short which was done in a previous repair. Imagine that you're in charge of making a repair to the Pantheon facade sometime after the Roman period, and the columns arrive too short. You go to the contractor and you say, "Did you even look at the plans?" And he says, "I never saw those plans. I don't know where that came from." And you have to say, "Well, how did you bid this if you never saw the plans?" Anyway, these kind of arguments probably went on for most of human history. Regardless, the Pantheon we see today is restored to the original Greco-Roman proportions. And at the time of the Romans, experiencing the Pantheon would have been different. The piazza in front was lower, time and sediment having filled the space. So you would enter the Pantheon by going up steps, the dome hidden from your view. And since the Pantheon was engaged on all sides with more buildings, when you entered among the columns and through the doors, the round drum and the dome were a complete surprise. This was first century adventure architecture. Instantly, the Pantheon was an inspiration, and it has been copied in different ways ever since. A few of the many buildings include the Basilica of Maxentius, Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, the Duomo in Florence, the domes of mosques and Eastern Christian churches, Villa Capra in Vicenza, St. Peter's in Rome, St. Paul's in London, St. Isaac's in Russia, the library at UVA by Jefferson, the Jefferson Memorial, and even Albert Speer's design for the Volkshall, the unbuilt rally hall for the Nazis, was directly inspired by the Pantheon. His design was to have been 1,033 feet in diameter, and its oculus alone, the diameter of the Pantheon itself. It would have held 180,000 people. The Pantheon is unique in its style, unique in its construction, and unique in the influence it has had on every dome built ever since. And that's the rational reason to admire the Pantheon. But as I mentioned, there's an emotional reason why the Pantheon is my favorite building. As Architecture Codex fans know, my appetite for travel was fostered by my third year in architecture school because the University of Notre Dame had a program based in Rome, established by Professor Frank Montana, and this was done for no additional tuition. It was an amazing opportunity for someone who never thought such an adventure was affordable. Our program was based among the landmarks of San Andrea della Valle, Piazza Navona, and the Pantheon. This was our neighborhood. Each day for lunch, we would pass the Pantheon to get pizza at a place we called Pizza Pantheon, where Vittorio and Georgina Iantafi would take good care of we Notre Dame students. He even had a leprechaun sticker on the window of his shop and pictures of previous classes. So we would buy a couple of slices of rectangular pizza, a liter of cold Coca-Cola, and sit on the edge of the fountain in front of the Pantheon. We watched the tourist buses pull up and bewildered tourists scatter around the square, some even going inside the Pantheon. We fully appreciated how blessed we were to be there, even with the struggles of school and trying to survive on meager budgets. Back then, you did not need a ticket to get into the Pantheon. When it was open, you simply walked in, and we did on a number of occasions, but perhaps not enough times. Near the end of our year of study, a unique opportunity came to us. One of our professors, Judith DeMaio, knew someone who knew someone, and we got permission to get to the top of the Pantheon and look down the oculus. We climbed around the building, passing through the stairs and chambers that got you to the top. We walked across its crown, and we grasped the edge of the oculus. This puts one intimately in touch with the building. You never forget your first time. So count me in among that huge throng of people over the centuries, charmed by the Pantheon. Perhaps it is as irrational as my first crush on Catwoman, where my admiration made me feel that Julie Newmar and I have a special bond, even though we never met. Maybe I feel that special relationship with the Pantheon because all the time I spent with it in my youth. And maybe I hope the Pantheon feels the same about me. In some ways, people are like buildings. And if you have so many meals with a building, and look down its oculus. As a young person, it's very easy to fall in love. I'm Michael Molinelli, and this is Architecture Codex.